Jen, are we still waiting for a few people? It's still early, but
Hello, everybody.
Oh, there's the guy.
hello, Larry.
The one guy we can always
I
count
see
on.
being
right?
recorded too.
Right.
Yeah. Yep.
What's that?
Just so everybody's aware. I'm just so everybody's aware we're being recorded also.
Yes.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, you're live on YouTube right now. It looks like you're missing Kyle. Let's see. Nancy, potentially Nancy.
She just signed in.
You just joined
Okay.
us.
There we go. And Liz Foster Anderson is gone for the evening.
Okay, and Kyle just came on board.
There we go. Looks like everybody that said that they would be here is here.
Oh, Liz. All right. Well, I still have a couple minutes. We won't start. I don't want to violate anything. And Charlie Ramstad is with us tonight. Welcome, Charlie.
Yeah.
Hi, good evening.
I do have one attendee. I have Scott Waltz on. So
And what is he going to be on for?
he's for the Rock Ridge.
Okay. Let me know if anybody else comes on, Jen. Otherwise, I'd like to move that up to number 1. Okay.
Yep. I'm gonna go ahead and promote him. He's raised his hand.
Okay.
It's gonna be really nice when we can like see each other in 3D again.
Yeah,
I ran into a coworker of mine the other day. She's wearing a mask and sunglasses, and I've worked with her for 10 years, and I had to do a double take thinking, are you who I think you are?
I know.
Hey, Jen?
We have a lady who's been working for us for a year, and she's never seen the face of one of our the other people that works for us. That lady has had her mask on ever since it started. So, yeah.
Say, Dan Wennert, this is Scott Wallace. I'm also here for the Anchor Klein plat.
Very good. All right.
Thank you.
And we could take those items first so Scott can leave.
We will certainly do that. So, you don't think Scott wants to stay here to discuss the fence ordinance with us?
I don't think so.
And you're really breaking up.
Oh, well, that's odd. If it gets too bad, I'll turn this meeting over to Nancy. I believe she's the vice chair. Any better? Maybe not.
Still breaking up.
Sometimes if you shut your video off when you're having an audio breakup, you'll get clear audio anyway.
Yeah, let's see if that'll work. Good idea. So am I coming through any better, Jen?
Yeah.
Yes, much better.
Okay. I think she just told me that, so you guys didn't have to see my face, but anyway. Sure, when this is over and people are telling
It's
me to wear
legitimate, Dan, even though you may not believe it.
Well, let's I have 5:30, so we're gonna get started. We will move a couple of things up that Scott's here for. If I start breaking up, let me know and we'll turn this over to Nancy or somebody. So I'm gonna have to read the emergency order and procedures piece, so bear with me here. So I'm going to call this meeting to order, but pursuant to Minnesota Statute 13D 021, it is hereby found necessary that in-person meetings of the Planning Commission are not practical or prudent due to the COVID-19 health pandemic and the peacetime emergency declared by Governor Walz. Therefore, today's meeting is being held through telephone and other electronic means without the members of the public or city officials present at the regular physical location. These proceedings are being live streamed through YouTube, to meet the requirements of Minnesota Statute 13D021. So I think everybody knows the functions of Zoom. Most of the buttons are at the bottom of your screen. Please mute when you're not actually speaking. When you do speak, please identify yourselves. And then again, don't try to mute yourself when not speaking. In addition, each commission member should state their name when you make a motion and when you second a motion. All votes will be required to be a roll call vote. And those wishing to speak to an issue should raise their hand, which is another button on Zoom when you wish to participate. If we have participants, we will promote them as their issue comes up to full participant. Just a couple of notes. The issues that we address here tonight will also be addressed at the CDC meeting, which is on May 10th at 5 p.m. And again, at the City Council meeting on May 11th, 2021, which is also at 5 p.m. So everything is heard at least 3 times here. So going on with that, I'm going to look for officially, I need to officially ask who's here tonight. So I have Don, is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. Chris?
I'm here.
Thank you. Marcus?
Here.
Thank you. Eric?
Here.
Thank you. Sean?
Yep, I'm here.
Good. Nancy?
I'm here too.
Good, thank you. And Kyle?
Yep, I'm here.
And we have Liz not attending tonight. So with that, I'll need to ask for approval of the minutes. So they are included in your packets. And are there any additions or changes to the minutes of the meeting held on March 25th? If not, I'd be looking for a motion for approval. Is that a motion to approve, Don?
Yeah, Don Marston approves it.
Thank you. Motion for approval. Do I hear a second?
Don Carlson, second.
Thank you. So let's start out with Don. How do you vote?
Aye.
Thank you. Chris?
Aye.
Marcus?
Aye.
Eric?
Aye.
Sean?
Aye.
Thank you. Nancy?
Aye.
Kyle?
Aye.
Okay, and I'm going to thank you. So the motion passes, minutes are approved, and I'm just going to note, by the way, that the intent is that the next meeting of this body will be a hybrid meeting, which means you'll have the option to attend in person or via Zoom. So with that here, unless I hear an objection, I'm going to move a couple of items up on the agenda. Item, let's see, item B, 3B, public hearing. We'll take first, and then we added an agenda item which we'll take second, which is the Rock Ridge final plat under business. So with that, I'm going to open a public hearing to give consideration to the preliminary plat of Anchor Klein at 20074 Klein Road. Larry, could you fill us in on what's happening here, please?
Yes, this is a 2-lot plat in the city's extraterritorial area. Both of the lots meet the requirements for lots in an ag district. So if you look at the staff report, one of the things I had on there was that they get the property rezoned to residential. They don't need to do that. They can keep it in an ag zone and still build 2 homes on these 2.5 acre, on each of the 2.5 acre lots. So with that, the only other condition that there would be is that they get a letter from the township stating that they don't need to have a road agreement because they are on an existing public road. So with that, I would recommend final plat approval. Or excuse me, preliminary plat approval.
Thank you. Yep. Okay, thank you. Questions from the commission or the audience to Larry? All right, Scott, do you have anything you want to add to this?
No, not really. Larry covered it very well. I'm here with Gary Klein, the developer, or Gary Heitkamp, the developer. So if you have any questions for him specific to the property, he can answer those as well. But Larry's correct. It's 2-lot plat. They'll both remain zoned agricultural.
Thank you. Questions from the, Kevin Shea joined us, and can you tell me what he's here for?
He's here for McDonald's.
Okay, so we'll be taking that after the next two items then. Thank you. So any questions from the members of the Planning Commission for Larry or Scott on this? Okay, hearing no questions, I'd be looking for a motion to approve this.
This is Nancy. I would move to approve
Very good.
this plat.
Thank you. And a second?
Marcus.
I'll second it.
Okay, we'll got a second. We'll have Don on this one. He was jumped in there just a little bit ahead. So I'll call the roll. Kyle, how do you vote?
Yes.
Nancy?
Aye.
Sean?
Aye.
Thank you. Eric?
Aye.
Marcus?
Aye.
Chris?
Aye.
Thank you. Don?
Aye.
Thank you. So with that, we'll move on to, it would be, actually, I've closed the public hearing and the motion passes, and we will recommend the approval of the preliminary plat to the CDC. So with that, we're going to move down to business at this point, which is the Rock Ridge final plat. So Larry, could you give us your information on this, please?
Yes, we have reviewed this plat before and granted preliminary plat approval. It's here before us now for final plat approval. The final plat meets all the requirements of our subdivision ordinance. The owner did get a letter from Burlington Township stating that no road agreement is necessary because they are on a township road that is already maintained by the township. So with that, I would recommend approval, provided that the owner show that the property is zoned residential and that they pay the $540 park dedication fee.
All right, thank you, Larry. Questions from the Planning Commission or the audience on this? For Larry. Okay, hearing none and seeing no hands raised, I would ask if members have questions for Larry or Scott on this. Okay, well, with that, I'd be looking for a motion on this. If you do recommend approval, it would be with the two conditions that Larry talked about, which would be zoning it residential and payment of the park dedication fee. So I'm looking for a motion on that.
This is Eric. I'll make that motion with the conditions.
Thank you, Eric. Do I hear a second?
This is Kyle. I'll second that.
Thank you, Kyle. Further discussion on this motion? Hearing none, I'm going to call the vote. So, Sean, how do you vote on this?
Aye.
And Eric?
Aye.
Marcus?
Aye.
Thank you. Chris?
Aye.
Don?
Aye.
Kyle?
Aye.
Nancy?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion is approved, and we will forward this to, again, to the CDC recommending approval of this. So with that, let's move back up to public hearing. I'm going to open up the public hearing on consideration of a parking variance to allow 45 spaces instead of the required 73 at 415 Frazee Street, which is McDonald's. Jen, please make sure Kevin is brought up to participant on this, and we will start out with report from Larry on this.
Okay. This is a request from McDonald's. I'm trying to get my screen share back here, so just hold on a second.
Okay.
Okay, here we go. This is a request from McDonald's. And do you see the screen now?
No, Larry, can't see it.
Hold on, we'll get that. We'll get that for you.
Okay. And we have screen sharing.
Okay, very good. Okay.
Oh,
so
I'm Larry,
McDonald-
but we have Rock Ridge up here.
I have McDonald's up on my screen, so I'm not sure what's going on here.
Okay, am I the only one showing Rock Ridge or?
No, mine was Rock Ridge too.
Okay,
This was Don.
Okay, now do you have McDonald's?
Yes.
yes, McDonald's is showing up on my screen.
Okay,
And all of
Okay.
a sudden I'm hungry for a bag of fries. I don't understand,
Okay.
but anyway, go ahead.
so McDonald's has a request before you to put in a twin ordering bypass lane. And what they're looking at is that they would have a reduction in parking spaces from 54 down to 45. The required parking for McDonald's on this particular site is 73 spaces. So they would be down close to only having 60% of the required parking. So if you saw the applicant's request, you would see that they're stating that the variance is in harmony with the general purpose and intent of the ordinance. They say that the purpose lists off-street parking. The regulation of off-street parking spaces is to alleviate or prevent congestion in the public right-of-way and to promote safety and general welfare of the public. And they feel that by having this double drive-through, they would eliminate some of the times when their drive-through has parking out onto Frazee Street. They also feel the variance is consistent with the comprehensive plan, and they list a couple of things from the comprehensive plan that supports that statement. The property owner also proposes to use the property in a reasonable manner. The current zoning ordinance requires 73 parking stalls. This is more than what is necessary, they say, for their operation. They historically aim at providing 50 parking spaces for a store of this size. Number 4, the plight of the landowner is due to circumstances unique to the property. And they say that the pandemic has created restrictions for in-person restaurant dining, so they're limited to 50% capacity, so they don't really need all of that parking. And that's fine for this time, but once that restriction goes away, then they would have parking issues. And they currently use the city's parking lot as overflow parking for guests and for employees, which isn't right. They don't have any agreement with the city to do that. What they do have with the city is an easement to provide parking spaces in their own parking lot that's already been constructed. Finally, the variance, if granted, would not alter the essential character of the locality. The variance, if granted, would not change the character of the McDonald's site or the character of the locality. The proposed changes are operational in nature with limited impact on the site. So that's what McDonald's is asserting in their argument. And if we made those findings, we could grant them a variance. The staff notes that the property already has less parking than is required. They currently only have 54 spaces instead of 73. And with this variance, they would be at 45 spaces. So we think that you should consider the following findings. First, is the variance in harmony with the purpose and intent of the ordinance? No, the purpose of the ordinance is to ensure that businesses have adequate parking to properly run their business and not create congestion. 45 spaces is approximately 60% of the required parking, and it is not adequate. That doesn't even meet the target number of 50 spaces that McDonald's specified in their application. The company is also using adjacent city parking for overflow. And if we granted this variance, that would become even more of a problem. Number two, is the variance consistent with the comprehensive plan? I think that a commercial use in a B3 district is consistent with the comprehensive plan. Number three, does the proposal put the property to use in a reasonable manner? The use of this property with a side-by-side two-lane drive-through can be considered a reasonable use of the property. However, allowing a restaurant use or any use without adequate parking to serve its needs is not using the property in a reasonable manner. Number four, are the circumstances unique to the property? This is a normal commercial lot that just is not large enough for the type of use that's being proposed. There's nothing unique about the lot that prevents the owner from meeting the zoning ordinance requirements. And number five, will the variance maintain the essential character of the neighborhood? The proposed use will not maintain the essential character of the neighborhood, as it will put increased pressure for parking on the adjacent lots. Based on the findings above, I recommend denial of the requested variance. While the idea of a double-lane drive-through is good as it could possibly reduce the lines backing out onto the public road, it should not come at the expense of reducing the needed on-site parking.
Okay, is that it, Larry?
That's it.
All right, so questions for Larry. Okay, not hearing any questions for Larry, then we have Kevin Shea with us. Kevin, would you care to make any comments tonight on your variance request?
Sure. Yes, I would, Chair. So just I can introduce myself. I'm Kevin Shea with Landform Professional Services. We are the consultant that works for McDonald's that made the request. And I just had a couple things to add to the staff report. McDonald's is looking to improve in this location due to the demand through the drive-through. Historically, they do see about 70% of the traffic going through the drive-through area. So it is a vital service that they provide. And it is increased to about 90% through the pandemic just because of in-person dining restrictions. So they're just looking to improve the efficiency of that area to hopefully alleviate some of the traffic concerns with backing up onto Frazee Street. Excuse me. They are also could reduce the seating interior to the building if that's something the commission would like to see as part of it. It doesn't actually reduce the number of parking stalls required because of the calculations based on the size of the building, the gross floor area, and not the seats within the restaurant. So we didn't include that in the request to begin with because it wouldn't reduce the number of required parking to bring us closer to compliance. However, it would likely reduce the number of people parking on site because there wouldn't be as many spaces to dine in interior over the long run. So just things for consideration there. As
Kevin, how many seats do they currently have in that store?
120. And they were, the owner said he could reduce it to up to 20% or 24 seats to hopefully, if that would alleviate the 9 lost parking stalls from what's existing there today. However, it wouldn't bring our total number required any closer to conformance because of the way it's calculated, but it would reduce the number of patrons that could be in the restaurant at one time.
Okay. Thank you, Kevin. Anything else, Kevin?
I'm just here for questions if any of the commissioners have questions.
Okay, very good. So at this point, I'm going to have the commissioners ask questions of either Kevin or Larry on this.
I have a question for Larry. Marcus Locker.
Go ahead, Marcus.
Has McDonald's approached the city at all regarding compensation for that use of that parking lot, like a lease or anything like that? Is that even feasible?
That would not be feasible. The city wouldn't want to tie up that parking with a lease.
Yeah, I've noticed that when we've had major meetings at the city offices, that lot can fill up also, especially if snow removal. We have a big pile of snow in the corner there, so I don't know that would be a good plan. It's a good question, but I don't know that it would be a good plan. So further questions?
Yeah, this is Nancy. I've got a question for Larry. So historically, how is it that McDonald's got through with so many fewer parking spots in the beginning, or is that 73 requirement, is that with some new ordinances?
They had a variance when they first built. for
And
parking.
that the requirements were the same at that time as well?
Yes.
Okay.
This is Sean Carlson. I have a quick question for Kevin. When moving to a double lane drive-through like this, what type of efficiency improvement in throughput do you see at a site like this?
It's usually not quite 2 to 1. Like, with 2 drive-through lanes, you could sometimes expect it to be twice as efficient. It's not quite that, just because the stacking does merge at some point, in the site plan. So it usually increases efficiency by around 50%, is kind of a ballpark number that they try to achieve. It can sometimes be higher, depending on how efficient employees and vehicles get through, but around 50% is a pretty good indicator.
And based on peak traffic at the site now and the issue that you're seeing with cars stacking out to the street, et cetera, what's the expected impact at peak times to that traffic flow from a numbers perspective?
I guess I couldn't speak to exactly how many cars they would serve and the increase going through the drive-through, but if the efficiency is 50% faster or getting those cars through, assuming the same amount of traffic, it would reduce the stacking by around 50% as well. So if there were at any time, 10 cars stacking, they'd hope to get that down to about 5. So that would save around 100 feet of stacking space if you decrease by 5 spaces.
This is Eric. I have a question for Kevin.
Go ahead.
Kevin, do you know how many employees are at the Detroit Lakes site?
I don't know that. I'd have to reach out to the store owner to know the exact number of employees that are currently on the site.
Any idea how many are on per shift?
Usually, and this is not going to be exact because I would have to ask the store owner who manages the shifts, but normally it's around a peak time at the most would be 15. Usually more around like 10 to 12.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions?
I guess I've got a question for Kevin.
Go
So
ahead, Nan.
when you've got more cars going through ordering, what kind of strategy do they have in the kitchen to keep up with that faster pace? It's been a while since I've been through there, but I can recall back orders when you get over the window to pick things up that you end up having to wait there, which stacks up cars. And they've oftentimes had you pull forward a little bit and somebody brings it out to you. And you're taking up some other space on the pickup side too.
Mhm.
What's the strategy to move more cars through if you're gonna have more cars to ordering windows?
Yeah, so the way it kind of works is when they take the orders, they're going to come in a little bit faster. So they tend to focus. Once you have a double drive-through, they may hire a couple additional employees during, peak drive-through times. And then they usually put more employees in the kitchen area and more employees on the drive-through. So they kind of have a bigger team working those areas to kind of bring through the efficiency. And then I know there's some operational things that happen with a double drive-through. I can't speak to those specifically because they're not part of my expertise with the site. That's usually with the store owner that manages those. So I can't speak to what they do operationally, but I know they have a plan that gets put in place when you go from a single to a double.
This is Sean. I have another question for Kevin. How do the current traffic levels to the drive-through compare to pre-pandemic levels? And what's McDonald's expectation for traffic levels as dining restrictions are lifted in the future?
Yeah, so I can't talk to specific numbers pre and post. I wasn't able to get those from the store owner as they bring the numbers through. I can say that pre-pandemic, roughly 70% of the traffic coming through a site it was 10 years ago it was between 50 and 55%. It crept up to right before the pandemic to about 70%, and it's been increasing at that kind of steady rate of having more drive-through traffic as people just don't dine in as much. And then obviously with the pandemic there's a spike that happened right away where it jumped up to 90 to 95% depending on current restrictions at the time. And it has been increasing, and that McDonald's has kind of been going that route of anticipating the drive-through traffic to continue increasing at the same rate it has been. I mean, if you take out the pandemic, they still expected it to go past the 70% to 75 or 80%. And so a lot of what the improvements they're doing to their stores are centered around increasing the efficiency and improving the flow through that area so that as it increases, it doesn't create more conflicts.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a
Okay.
question.
Go ahead, Marcus.
After the double lane order, do the vehicles merge back into one lane, or are they still two lanes after the order process?
Yeah, it does merge back in after you order. So there's kind of a merge point in there where they'll come back together after they order. And that's just usually because there's the inefficiency with when you have one vehicle that takes a longer time to order, and then you might have a bunch of quick vehicles. It kind of balances that out by having two.
Okay, thank you. Further questions? Okay, well, hearing no further questions, I'm going to close the public hearing and look for a motion to approve or deny this variance request.
This is Eric. There's a few comments before I make a motion, but I think this is the future of most drive-through fast food places. I mean, I don't, it's going to be 100% drive-through, probably not, but I mean, their numbers are showing they went from 50 to 55 and 70 before pre-pandemic, and now they're 90. Just the lifestyle that people live, I think drive-through is the future. So with that being said, I'd make a motion to approve this.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Is there a
Eric,
second?
I have a question, Eric. Does that
Say-
include a reduction of the indoor seating by 20%?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, yes, it does. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
This is Chris. I'd second that motion.
Okay, thank you, Chris. So further discussion on this motion then. I'm gonna start it off. I guess I'm really concerned about this. I'm probably gonna vote no on it, depending on what else is said during this phase. You know, and looking at this, this is really tight in here. The drive-through ends up going, a second drive-through goes right up to the property line. I think there's it's just too tight. It's going to make a mess in here. You know, if we have further cars stacking because they're waiting for orders for special things, I know there's certain items that take longer because they're not right on hand, that we can end up with a real mess in here. There's a lot going on in a very small space. So that's my concern with this. So further discussion?
Yeah, this is Don. And I guess my concern is you got the traffic kind of flowing one way. It's coming in and going out. But with that, like you were saying, it butts right up to the property line. The cars that are going to be parked along the one side there and kind of in the front, I would think that that's going to create a difficulty kind of getting, you know, say if it's at a certain time of the day when there's a lot of guys driving in for the drive up, for those people to get out. So I guess I would question that it would be a pretty difficult situation to have that jam up right there. And I would probably have to oppose that.
Can I comment on that? That's Eric here.
Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
I would say that condition exists already. It's not like they're giving away free cheeseburgers where everyone in town is going to come. It's a certain amount of people that are already going there. And 90% of the people are using the drive-through. So you only have 10% of the people using the parking. And if you've been there, driven through that, I mean, it's already an issue, but people will still go there. And that's the McDonald's problem, not really our problem. Is that correct? You hear where I'm coming on that one?
This is Sean. I have a comment kind of in line with that too. When I think about the current facility, I agree that problem already exists, and I don't know how you get around that. It looks like the sacrifice of the 9 slots gives them still a drive-through area to move around that traffic that's in the drive-in lane. But thinking back to prior to the pandemic, I can never think of a single time that we couldn't find a parking spot at McDonald's, but I can think of many a time when I had to stop on the street and wait for the drive-through lane. And I would think that's a greater public safety hazard and a greater concern for the community than the parking spaces, especially when you consider the numbers of drive-through versus dine-in in this scenario.
I have a question for Larry. This is Chris. It looks like there's a 10-foot wide path for that second drive-through and then an additional 12.5 feet for cars to get around. Is that correct?
That is correct. That's where they're losing the 9 parking spaces.
Yeah, so I don't agree that it's going to affect the traffic going around any more than it already does. And if anything, it might improve it.
Okay, I didn't see that over there, that line.
Yep.
I have a question for Sean. Kevin. Has there been any practice runs or any kind of testing to determine whether or not the semis can get through around there in that 12-foot area to get in to supply the store? I assume.
Yeah, so with every improvement we make, we run a truck turning movement exhibit internally for McDonald's that shows with their semi trucks, which they're called WB40s. We run a movement exhibit that shows that they can access throughout the site to, say the trash enclosure or to make deliveries. And that is a movement exhibit that has radiuses on it to show that the trucks can maneuver throughout the site without conflict. And this site met all the turning radiuses to meet. So they could maneuver to the trash enclosure or to make deliveries to the site.
Thank you.
Further comments. I guess my concern is still that the pandemic's going to be over and people are going to want to park in there again. And the city lot just isn't an answer to that. But further comments.
How much overflow, Larry? This is Sean. I'm sorry. How much overflow happens do we observe in the city lot today from the existing McDonald's site?
It varies, but there's anywhere from half a dozen to 10 cars sometimes in there from McDonald's. And it's just not right for them to expect to use the neighboring parking lot for their needs.
Well, and what you'll see in there too are, if a bus comes through there to do dine in, for example, the bus will park over in the city lot. People with boats, so they take up more than just a spot or two. It can get to be quite a bit. So there is no place there for any larger vehicle. So just FYI, good question.
I had a quick comment. This is Kyle Fody. When I've been through there on those parking spots that look like they're getting rid of, those are actually really hard parking spots to park in to begin with, because when you park there backing up with the drive-through, it's tough. So I never see vehicles in those few spots anyway. That's just my observation for what I've seen, because it's once you park there backing up with the drive-through, it's tough. And I've always avoided it / haven't seen much there, I guess.
Okay, thank you for that observation, Kyle.
Dan, one other thing is that the city parking lot could also change if the city does something different with City Hall, and it maybe wouldn't be available at all for McDonald's.
Yep, thank you, Larry. Further comments?
Yeah, this is Nancy. I have a concern about the more traffic through there and backing up even on the outside, going out when you've got more people ordering. That's going to impact the better side for the visitors parking. And I also get concerned about setting a precedent for allowing such a limited number of parking spots that is so much lower than what the expected is for that location. And additionally, I think I agree with Eric that the drive-through is getting to be more popular. It's not the only drive-through place that we have in town. And I just get concerned with, backup traffic anyway, both sides. But I'm kind of not in favor of it. I think that we shouldn't be impinging on the city lot anymore. And I don't like giving too many variances for that few parking spots with a company that should have more.
Thank you, Nancy. Any more comments? Okay, well, if there's no further discussion, I'm going to call for the vote. I will start with Chris on this one.
Aye.
Aye. Marcus?
Nay.
Nay. No. All right, thank you. Eric?
Aye.
Aye for Eric. Sean?
Aye.
Aye for Sean. Nancy?
Nay.
Nay. Kyle?
Aye.
Aye. Aye for Kyle. Don?
Nay.
No. Chair votes no. So I have 4-4. Does that match your vote, Jen? Or Larry, were you keeping track?
Yes, that is correct. 4-4.
So the motion fails, and I will report on that to the CDC committee that we didn't vote to deny, but we didn't vote to pass either. So I'll be very careful in how I convey the result to the Community Development Committee. Thank you. Okay, and again, Kevin, I don't know if you were on when when I mentioned it, but the way it works in Detroit Lakes is Planning Commission makes recommendations to the Community Development Committee, which meets on May 10th at 5 p.m., which will then consider this again and make a recommendation to the City Council, which meets at 5 p.m. on May 11th. So
Got it.
that's
Thank
where
you,
we're
Mr.
at.
Chair.
Okay, anything else, Larry, that we need to cover on this one?
No, that would be it.
That's really unusual for it to just sort of sit there, but I guess that's why we have multiple committees. So, all right, thank you. Okay, well, moving on, item C. So we've covered item 3A, item 3B, and item 3C has been withdrawn. We've covered the Rock Ridge final plat. So with that, we're down to business item. Let's do item 4A, fences. And then we'll hear from Charlie. He may have something to add in on this one. So I'm thinking we should go ahead with that. So Larry, would you please move ahead or fill us in on the changes you've made to?
Yes, at the February Planning Commission meeting, there was discussion about proposed amendments to our zoning ordinance regarding fences. And it's centered on materials that could be used. And also there was some discussion about maintenance. So based on those discussions, I drafted the following proposed changes to the ordinance. First, construction and maintenance. Every fence shall be constructed in a substantial workmanlike manner and of substantial material suitable for fencing. Approved material. All fences shall be constructed of stone, brick, finished wood, vinyl, metal, or chain link. Prohibited material. No fence shall be constructed of any agricultural fencing materials, electrically charged elements, barbed wires, cables, wire, or used materials. And finally, maintenance. Every fence shall be maintained in a condition of reasonable repair and shall not be allowed to become or remain in a condition of disrepair or danger. Every damaged or missing element of any fence or wall shall be repaired or replaced immediately. Any fence or wall which is or has become or remains in a state of disrepair is a public nuisance and may be subject to abatement. So those are the changes that I recommended. And if you look at the ordinance that's in your packet, it includes those changes.
Okay, thank you, Larry. Questions for Larry? Okay, no questions. We have talked about this one quite a bit, so I'm not surprised. Something may occur to you yet. Larry, were you looking for a motion on this tonight? I'm thinking we are.
Yes, we are.
Okay, so I would be looking for a motion to approve these changes and recommend them then to the CDC. If
Yeah, this
somebody
is
would like-
Nancy. I would move to approve the new ordinance with the changes that Larry has made.
Thank you, Nancy. Do I hear a second?
I'll second that, Marcus.
Marcus, thank you, Marcus. So any further discussion? Your last chance for questions on this. Okay,
No,
go
sorry.
ahead.
This is Sean. I have a question regarding, so we've done what we kind of discussed. We almost kind of didn't want to do last time, which was make it more restrictive by putting in the specific material types. However, I don't know. I think this accomplishes the intent of the statement, which is kind of what we, I think, ended on. My question really comes around enforcement. For example, let's say someone has a fence that uses wire but is in good taste and looks nice and is well maintained, and they already have that fence within city limits. Is that something where the city is going to say, hey, you need to remove that, that's no longer in? Or is it one of those where it's when it becomes in disrepair, that's when you have a reason to go deal with it?
It's a legal non-conforming use. So they would have the right to maintain that fence indefinitely. But once the fence was removed for more than a year, then they would have to replace it under this ordinance.
So Larry, in the vernacular, it would be grandfathered in, correct?
It would be grandfathered in. like
Thank
I
you.
said, a legal non-conforming use.
Yep.
Thank you. That answers my question adequately. Thank you, Larry.
You know,
Larry, I have a-
something else,
I have- this is
something
Chris.
else that occurs to me is that, you know, it's tough to put down approved materials, but at least we've got some down. But if somebody comes in with something that's not on the list, Larry, we would be able to grant a variance if we thought it was in good taste or adequate. Am I correct?
You could, although if it's a variance, they have to explain why they have a practical difficulty for not meeting the ordinance. So I think
I
it would
see.
be somewhat difficult to do that.
Okay.
But I
This is
think if we
Chris.
ran into something, Dan, that we thought was an okay material and it wasn't on our list, we would probably look at amending our list if we had a significant number of people requesting that.
All right. Thank you.
This is Chris. I have a question for Larry. So when you say legal non-conforming use, if somebody has something that's not in this and they want to add an additional structure on their property, would this prevent them from doing that?
Then they would need a variance. And I suppose the hardship would be that if they had to remove the entire fence to replace it and match, that seems a bit excessive. So I think we could look at that way.
That would certainly seem to make be a hardship. Yes.
And in the current ordinance, there's already statements. Sorry, this is Sean. There's already statements to the effect of maintenance and disrepair in some capacity, right? There was something there.
There
Okay.
was something there. Yeah.
And you have added something in, I see. So
Yes.
that should help. Yep. Okay. Good. Good comments. More discussion? Okay, let's see. We had a motion on this, didn't rate already. So not hearing any further discussion, I'm going to, the last chance. I'm going to call for a
Dan,
vote.
do you recall who made the motion and who seconded?
Nancy made the motion.
Thank
Okay.
you. And,
Marcus, second.
Marcus, yep, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Very good, thank you. So we will start out the vote with Nancy, in fact.
Aye.
Thank you. Kyle,
Aye.
thank you. Don,
Aye.
thank you. Chris.
Aye.
Thank you. Marcus,
Aye.
thank you. Eric,
Aye.
Sean,
Aye.
and thank both of you, and chair votes aye. So the motion passes unanimously. So we have a recommendation for a new ordinance. Good job. So. Okay, well, with that, we do have an item on the agenda, which is one of some complexity, and there's some history involved. And so we have Charlie with us, but I'm gonna start out by having Larry introduce this. He's also been working on it for a long time. So Larry, you want to fill us in on what's going on
Yes.
with the subdivision controls, and then turn it over to Charlie, please.
Right. Some of the planning commissioners are very aware of what's been going on with regard to the subdivision ordinance. We had a public hearing on this a little over a year ago. And the council actually had first reading of an ordinance to do some amendments to our subdivision regulations. And basically, the city has enforced its subdivision regulations in the 2-mile extraterritorial area adjacent to the city since 1967. So it's been a long time. And state law allows cities to enforce its subdivision authority in the 2-mile area. And for many years, there was no controversy. However, for the past 2.5 years, the city has been talking to the county and the township about how the city exercises its subdivision authority in that 2-mile area. The county and the township wanted more involvement in the process, and the city was willing to amend its ordinance to satisfy some of their concerns. These concerns were first raised by Roy Smith, the county surveyor, and then the townships also got involved. There are some issues that we were very willing to concede on, But there were a few issues that we did not fully agree with the township and the county on. And these issues were related to lot sizes, which would require platting and park dedication fees. But generally, we agreed to most of the changes they requested. Now the townships are exploring the possibility of adopting their own subdivision regulations and essentially trying to block the city from having any involvement in that. And there are many important reasons why the city wants to exercise its subdivision authority in this 2-mile area. First, it's good for proper planning for infrastructure. The extension of streets, water, sewer, and electric and gas lines are really quite difficult without having this authority in that 2-mile area adjacent to the city. It's also important for public safety, such as fire and ambulance, school bus access, and snow plowing. We also like to have it because we can coordinate with the township on proper road design. The city and the township share many of the same concerns about making developers follow through with proper road construction and road design. Annexation also becomes difficult as the density of an area increases and it transitions from rural to urban. We need to plan for necessary and proper street networks and extension of infrastructure. And if the area is broken up into disjointed lots, it becomes hard to do that. Also, creating a bunch of smaller lots on the edge of the city makes it more difficult for the city to annex territory when the time comes. We also feel it's good public policy. We feel that townships provide governance in rural areas and cities provide governance in the urban areas. And we believe that sound platting in the 2-mile extraterritorial area is very important to orderly growth of the city. So as I stated earlier, the city has been willing to amend its ordinance regarding the issues that the township and county have raised. And now I'll turn it over to Charlie Ramstead, the city attorney, to review some of the proposed ordinance changes that we have come up with. So Charlie, if you want to step in, this would be the time.
I want to step into the fray, in other words.
Into the fray, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to presume that, there was a letter that I drafted, I think on April 7th and went to the city council. That was included in your packet. I'm not planning on going through that letter in any kind of detail. Just to provide a little bit of a summary of it. And whether you are interested in reading the boring aspect of it or not, I'll leave that to your own discretion. The main thing that I'd like to focus on when we move into this is that, Larry talked about the, efforts that the city had made to try to accommodate whatever concerns were being expressed to us by the townships and the county. And he alluded to the fact that we'd already actually brought a changed ordinance up in front of the Planning Commission back in the fall of 2019. Just a little bit of a history there in that we were advised, I think maybe first by Roy Smith, but maybe also by the county administrator that, there was some dissatisfaction with the application of our subdivision controls within the townships. And so we met with, I think mostly at that time, it was county commissioners, the county administrator, Kyle Verberg, who is the county zoning administrator, Roy Smith, and we had some meetings discussing what the concerns were, and worked on coming up with a draft of those changes. I think we actually all kind of thought that we had an agreement. We traded a few drafts back and forth between the county administrator and the city staff. And that's what led to a public hearing in front of the Planning Commission back in the fall of 2019. Some of you may recall that. And out of that planning commission recommendation, there was a first reading of some ordinance changes. Now, I'm not sure what happened in the intervening time after we had the planning commission meeting, but it became pretty clear to us, expressed to us by a number of people, that, you know, the changes that we had thought were an agreed upon modification were no longer good enough, or there was additional opposition to them. So we stopped at that time. So the city never proceeded with a second reading of those ordinance changes. And I think the reason was not because we didn't want to do them, but because we thought, well, if there's some additional tweaking that we have to do, we should try to get together with the county, city, or townships and find out what those changes were. And that was in the fall of 2019. You know, since then, it's just been really difficult to try to figure out. We never did get a response from them as to what it was that was not adequate with those changes. I know that there is concerns, and they have expressed concerns to us about lot sizes and the minimum requirements for platting. And their, I think, belief is that, you know, these lots that are under 5 acres should not have to be platted within that 2-mile zone. And, you know, we've countered with the reasons why we think it's appropriate and all of that, but we've never been able to meet with them to try to go through actual changes to the ordinance that might address their concerns. Later on in the fall of 2020, it also became, you know, evident that one of their issues was really not necessarily the substance of the ordinance, but I think a general feeling among the townships that, you know, they just needed to be in control of subdivisions within their boundaries, and so outside of the city. And that leads into my letter to the city council. Again, you can read the details if you want, but a general summary is, you know, when this came up in the fall of 2020, we did a lot of research to look and say, okay, what is the law with regard to, you know, if a township goes out and adopts their own subdivision ordinance, you know, what happens? And there's a couple of things that we've learned. First of all, there's an attorney general opinion back from, I believe, 1967, that essentially says that, you know, townships subsequently passing their own ordinances don't supersede the city's ordinance. And, you know, we were concerned because that was from 1967. And so we went to the attorney general again and asked for, you know, clarification. The attorney general essentially declined to address the question, but in their response, they included the 1967 opinion. And in my view, that means that, you know, they didn't contradict it, and that remains still a valid opinion of the attorney general. Now, attorney general opinions aren't court decisions. They don't have as much weight from a precedential value as a court decision would. And so their bottom line, there is no court decision as to the question. And the question posed really is, you know, if the townships adopt their own ordinances, you know, I mean, is the city's ordinance going to be superseded? And the attorney general's opinion that's out there says no, and there's no other law to contradict that. And so what it looks like to us is if they go ahead and adopt subdivision ordinances, they certainly have the right to do that. But then there's a question within the 2-mile zone. If the city's ordinances are not superseded, so the city still has subdivision control within that 2-mile zone. That's what the law that's out there says. Well, then what happens with the subdivision ordinances in that 2-mile zone that the townships pass? The 1967 opinion from the Attorney General effectively said that the townships were without the power to exercise subdivision controls within that 2-mile zone after if they didn't have a pre-existing subdivision ordinance. But at the very least, they either would not have any control, or maybe the worst alternative would be that there's 2 subdivision ordinances, so that a landowner within the 2-mile zone would have to come and get subdivision approval, not only from the city of Detroit Lakes, but would also have to go and get subdivision approval from the county. Well, actually from the townships, although I think the township's plan is to have the county administer their subdivision ordinances. And that looks to us, at least from a staff level, to be a recipe for some really unhappy landowners within that 2-mile extraterritorial area. So we thought that the appropriate thing to do was to try to make an effort to address those concerns that have been expressed to us from the townships in a discussion anyway about a change of the ordinance. In the early part of 2021, so January, I think it was, maybe beginning of February of this year, we worked on changes that we thought to the ordinance that we thought that would address some of those townships' concerns. We asked the townships to consider them. And we essentially got a response that said, we're not interested. We're going to go ahead with our own subdivision ordinances. And that draft that we put together in the spring is in your packets up in front of you. I think we should go through that a little bit to talk about what some of those things are. But my message really to the Planning Commission and to the public in general is, these were changes that we put together at a staff level within the city. We didn't have specific input from, obviously, any of you. We didn't have specific input from any of the townships. It's, to some degree, an exercise in shadow boxing, trying to hit the target without really knowing what the target is. So this draft that I think we should go through at least a little bit here is not intended to be the be-all and end-all of what the city's position would be. In my view, today we'll go through and do a little bit of a summary of it, but I would ask you all to kind of read it. And it is the entire ordinance with the drafts that shows the changes over what our current ordinances state, and with some ideas for changes. But you might have other ideas, okay? You might have other suggestions, which I think we should, not necessarily today, because I don't know that you've had a chance to really go through it at that level. But if you do, we should probably discuss those changes. We would like to get actual township participation in this. I'm not naive enough, given what their position has been, to think that that's very likely. But given the consequences, I think, to landowners within the 2-mile zone of having to potentially be required to satisfy 2 separate subdivision controls ordinances, I think it's worth a try. So with that, I'm just going to pull up on my screen. Larry's got this draft ordinance up on the screen, and I'm going to kind of go through that ordinance kind of step by step with what the rationale was with regard to some of the changes that we made. If you want to interrupt me, since I'm not looking at your screen as I do this now, please feel free to do that. with any questions, just speak up and I'll be quiet and get your questions. One of the things that we did, if we look through now, starting with the first comment in the ordinance, that's from Kelsey, we tried to look at the county's subdivision ordinance and try to glean from that some of the concepts or maybe the way that they did things in an attempt to kind of streamline things. And because remember, I mean, I think you all know this, but within the 2-mile zone currently, as it currently exists, landowners have to comply with the city's subdivision controls ordinance, but they also have to comply with the county's zoning ordinance. And then they need to satisfy the townships with regard to road accesses. I mean, in some of your earlier items on the agenda tonight, that was part of the discussion. So when we looked at the ordinance that we have, we thought that the premature subdivision section that's in our current ordinance was confusing and led to an attitude or a belief among the townships that, this was a hurdle that was, an unreasonable hurdle for landowners to have to meet before they could even really get this thing up in front of you. And so what we opted for as a suggestion is to add in this category called land suitability. And if you read through it, a lot of the concepts that are in there are from our existing premature subdivision section. But it sort of combines that. And it also combines that with some of the county's requirements and the countabilities analysis. The county's subdivision ordinance has a land suitability analysis, much like this. And so you can go through those criteria. None of them are particularly outlandish. None of them are terribly different from what we had in our existing ordinance. The other thing where another area where there's a major change proposed is in the exemption section. And that's because that has led to some confusion from landowners, confusion also from the county, and I think some confusion from us. What we're talking about there is, when can a landowner, not have to utilize a plat to divide up a piece of property. And the county's subdivision ordinance contains some exemptions, and ours contains some exemptions. And what we did was started to look at them and make them consistent with or made in an effort to be more consistent with the county's subdivision ordinance, and also with the statutory requirements that we are required to follow. I mean, one of the things that we have to know, the county subdivision ordinance is governed under a different state statute than what a township's subdivision ordinance must be, or what the city's. So the city and the township have to follow the same statute. That's in Minnesota Statute 462. Counties don't have to follow that. So county subdivision ordinances can be more flexible, more less restrictive than what township and city subdivision ordinances are required by statute to be. Now, that doesn't mean that the townships can just go adopt the county subdivision ordinance, because they can't. That's exactly what the point is that their ordinance has to follow the statutory requirements that our ordinance has to follow, whereas the county's ordinance does not. And so if the assumption is that the townships are simply going to be able to adopt subdivision ordinances similar to the counties with the less restrictions that the county can have. They're wrong. They have to follow the same rules, the state rules, same statutes that we do. So when you look at these exemptions, we tried to clean up the language. There isn't a great deal of substantive change, but one of the issues is boundary line changes, for existing pieces of property. That's a common exemption if there's just a boundary change. You're not really creating another lot. And so you should be able to not have to meet the requirements of platting in order to do that. So essentially what we did is our current draft actually says that you can only have these boundary adjustments in part of an existing recorded plat, which doesn't make much sense. I mean, there's a lot of properties that aren't platted properties, so we got rid of that. But otherwise, we just kind of cleaned up the language of that exemption section to make it, a little bit easier to read. You'll note that Kelsey has a note on there that one of the changes addresses the county's concern that too many plats are required. So what we've done is we made it changed with, in the exemption levels, depending upon whether you are 1 mile out from the city or whether you're between 1 and 2 miles. And if you are, going to be within the 1 mile where existing parcels, tracts, lots, or interests will be 5 acres or larger in size and 300 feet in width within the city and within 1 mile of the corporate limits. Okay. The idea there is that, if they're going to be larger tracts, then they don't have to meet that criteria. But, within the first mile anyway, they have to be at least 5 acres. But we did make a change. That's consistent with our current ordinance. But we did make a change in section D there as accommodation. Within the zone that's 1 to 2 miles, we thought that it was appropriate to go down to 2.5 acres so that you could have a 2.5 or a 3 acre tract without requiring a plat. And then the other things are just cleanups. Cemetery lots obviously are not going to be 2.5 acres in size. They should be exempt from the platting requirements. And then the law basically is that court orders can create boundary adjustments and they don't have to meet the approval. We thought, well, we didn't need to have that because it's obvious, but I think it's better to leave it in there so that it's clear that the court orders do result in those things. And that occurs in a lot of the stuff that I do in my private practice, which is, boundary line disputes and creations of clearing up title with corrective legal descriptions. I don't hear anybody yelling at me to say what's the question, so I'm just going to kind of zoom down through it. And again, I'm not going to go through this every step by step. We are talking about, if there's a conflict between minimum standards, and both the county zoning ordinance and the city ordinance. So we just got rid of limiting that to the city. I mean, that's pretty obvious since within the extraterritorial zone, it's county zoning that governs. I don't think there's anything particularly significant in that. We went down and did some definitional changes. I think those are pretty obvious. I mean, we actually defined the extraterritorial area. We defined some of the concepts of between parcels and meets and bounds. A lot of that, to be honest with you, is just sort of housekeeping changes that we think would make the ordinance itself easier to understand. I don't know if any of you have had a chance to pore over the ordinance in detail, but every time I read it, I have some questions about what things are meant. And so we tried to just add in some definitions that would clarify some of those issues. One of the significant change would be in subdivision 44. It's in section 4 of this thing, where we added in a definition of a technical review panel. The county uses technical review panels in its zoning ordinance. And what the technical review panel is in the context of the county zoning is, and county subdivision, is where you have a chance to meet with various representatives of organizations if you're a developer before you actually make the application. And the purpose of that is to help you get your ducks in a row, right? I mean, to get an idea about what the various, whether it's the watershed district or whether it's other governmental control agencies would have, gives you an ability to kind of run that down. So we tried to borrow from that concept with what we are calling a technical review panel. It might be better to have a different name to not confuse it with that. A pre-subdivision review panel or whatever you want to call it. But the idea is that in the extraterritorial area, we should have some sort of formal process so that landowners, can understand what the various requirements are, not only of the city, but also of the county zoning and the townships. One of the suggestions from the county is that, that people in that territorial zone, because it's controlled by the city, don't have any input into subdivisions within their own, township. And, I think that is to some degree a legitimate concern. I note that our current, ordinance does allow for appointment by the city to the planning commission of people who, I think it says up to 3 people who are not residents of the city. We could expand on that concept. So there's no legal prohibition against having non-city residents as members of the planning commission. I suppose there would be nothing to prohibit, the creation, frankly, of a separate planning commission for the extraterritorial zone. Larry might not be too happy about that, just because you might end up with, double the work. You've got a separate planning commission, but in theory, you could do that if you thought that was better. But there certainly would be no prohibition against having this technical review panel. And there's certainly no prohibition against going further than that if you or other people thought that was appropriate, and actually having, non-city residents on the planning commission, or even a separate planning commission that dealt with just the extraterritorial area. But this effort was to address that concern by having the governmental agencies appoint, one member to a technical review panel. We say in here appointed by the city, 1 member appointed by the county, 1 member appointed by the township. Earlier language had from the township, from the city, from the county. One concern I have is if we don't get township participation in these changes, I still think that many of these changes we should consider making anyway. We may want to go back to from rather than by if we can't get the town boards and the county to cooperate by actually appointing people to this body. But I leave that open for discussion. So again, that is one of the more substantive changes to the definitional parts. And then if you look at it, when we talk about preliminary plat, go on to section 5, again, a pre-application meeting. Again, that's an effort to address township concerns regarding representation in the process. And, also requires the townships to be able to pipe in on road design and the county zoning requirements. So again, you can read that.
Charlie, I have a quick question.
Sure.
This can't be a Detroit Lake specific problem, right? I mean, there's got to be other communities that have this same type of issue with their surrounding townships. So do you have any, data from how other communities are dealing with these types of issues with their townships in the counties?
I don't have data. I have some knowledge, and maybe Larry will pipe in on this as well. There are some alternatives, okay? One of them is written into a statute. It's called a joint planning board. At the end of my letter to the city council, I discussed that, okay? The interesting thing about that is that I did some research on it, and I couldn't find any city in the state of Minnesota that had actually utilized that joint planning board process. And one of the reasons is that I think that it's really not very well drafted. It leaves a lot of open questions about how that sort of joint planning board would function. But so in answer to your question, one alternative is that joint planning board, okay?
And the negative part about a joint planning board is that you're now creating another level of government and a whole new zoning ordinance and subdivision ordinance to deal with the 2 mile extraterritorial area. The city becomes the agency that has to administer it, but they are outvoted on the board by the townships and the county. And so they may end up administering something that they have no belief in, that it's a bad ordinance. So they're stuck with administering something that they don't really like. And so those are the negatives from my perspective.
That's why I mentioned that Larry would be able to pipe in on that. That would create a lot of extra work, frankly. So
and the city has no power.
Yeah, well, the city has a voice, okay, but it certainly doesn't control it. No matter what, on that joint planning board, the city is a minority member, okay? And so that there are certainly issues where we don't think that the joint planning board is a good option. Now, the other answer to your question is to say, what have other cities done? And a number of cities have resolved this issue or tried to address this issue. Whether they've successfully resolved it or not is a question, by a joint powers agency. And I'll just introduce that concept and not try to get too sticky. We operate the Detroit Lakes Airport as a joint powers agency with the county, okay? So what you do is you create an agreement to for different governmental units to cooperate in a joint powers organization. So the city of Bemidji has had many of the same issues that we are having here. And they addressed that with joint planning boards with one, actually they originally had it with 2 of the surrounding townships. And that joint planning board then is, kind of like the statutory version of it, but it's much more flexible. In other words, it comes to an agreement. It's much more comprehensive. And so Bemidji addresses planning and zoning within not only the city of Bemidji, but also within one of the surrounding townships through that joint planning board. And, that is something that if the townships were interested in addressing, might be a good alternative. I can tell you, however, though, that I think Roy Smith at one of the meetings presented that as, one of the solutions and that everything was great up in Bemidji. And I can tell you that Bemidji has had nearly a decade of litigation with the township, one of the townships that was originally in the joint powers agency, and then for whatever reason became dissatisfied with it. So Bemidji is not a sterling example of a solution necessarily to this problem.
Is Bemidji the only city that has that, or one of very few?
Bemidji is one of very few. I didn't get a lot of statistics from the League of Minnesota Cities on this as to which ones actually have done it. There are other joint powers board. Again, there are none of the statutory joint planning board ones that we know of. There are 5 to 10 joint powers agencies that do it that way. You have to recognize that, this is kind of a non-metro problem. If you think about it, most of the metro area cities don't have this problem because there isn't any township outside of their borders. It's a city right outside of their borders. So it tends to be a problem that is sort of unique to cities like Detroit Lakes, Bemidji, that are mid-level, mid-population, non-metro area towns. So it's a long way of answering a short question, and it's not a very satisfactory one. But I do think that it might not be a bad idea if, to at least if the townships were willing to cooperate, to create or consider a joint powers agency for planning within the 2 mile zone. I think that's a much better alternative than the statutory joint planning board. And I realize those terms are similar, but they're vastly different in the way that the creation of that sort of entity would come about, and in the makeup of that sort of entity. One advantage to that is that any of the terminology, any of the controls, any of the authorities have to be negotiated on an equal basis, rather than sort of forced upon you and the joint planning board option, where the city is clearly a minority interest. So if you look, I would go back to the ordinance unless there's another question or a follow-up on that. Okay, so again, we do have added in some other provisions. You look at section 5, again, we added in a section in there that regard to review by other commissions or jurisdictions. That is, you may have gotten some feedback in the newspaper about the park board being dissatisfied with not getting the same information that you get. So again, what that is, to clarify in the language of the ordinance itself. It may be that the park board wants to switch their dates so they can actually make recommendations to you with regard to any issues that they felt were important. I think Marcus, having been the chair of the park board, can probably understand where that's coming from. But anyway, so that's what section E is.
I do think that these changes that we're suggesting really do a lot of good things. And if the townships would open their eyes to that, I think they would find that it is very good for them. And a lot of these things we're doing already on some level, but this is just clarifying it more and making it more imperative that we do these things in a very orderly way. But at this point, the county and the township have made it pretty clear that they're not interested in anything that we may try to do. That doesn't mean we shouldn't make some of these amendments, because they're just good amendments anyway.
Yeah,
So,
and
go ahead.
I guess what I would like the planning board members to consider is, even these changes that we are talking about that are, accommodations, if you want to look at that, to concerns expressed by the county and the townships. Again, as I said, it's a little bit of shadow boxing, but I'm not suggesting that, well, if they don't play ball with us on this, we should simply throw out those changes. I think it might not be a bad idea to implement those efforts to get township and county input into subdivisions, regardless of whether the townships are willing to cooperate. In other words, I don't think you should look at it as a either or, that we're only going to do the things like the technical review panel or the changes to the park dedication fees or the changes to the minimum lot sizes outside of the 1 mile between the 1 and the 2 mile thing. I don't think you should look at those as simply changes that will only occur if the town board comes to the table or the towns come to the table. I mean, I think some of those are good changes, frankly, whether or not they come to the table at all. I think if we go down, a lot of the stuff is just sort of boilerplate, but you can see how we've gotten rid of, the premature subdivision section of the ordinance. One of the complaints was that the burden was on the applicant. So we got rid of that, and that's fine. It doesn't have to be on the burden of the applicant. I mean, we have to, if it complies with the ordinance, they felt, I think, that we were being too harsh with landowners with the premature subdivision thing. And, if that's a feedback that they're getting from their residents, we thought it was appropriate to frankly just get rid of that. If you go down, a lot of these changes are just sort of, you can read where we have made some changes to go into make it like where we can anyway, the county's ordinance. We thought that they had some changes that were, or some things in their ordinance that actually were improvements. And so, whether you agree or don't agree with those changes, I guess that's the feedback that we need to get from you. But you can look at least why they came about. A lot of Kelsey's notes in there are the same as the county ordinance. So we tried to make things a little bit more uniform between the city and the county, so that there was not a grand discrepancy between what the county's doing and the city. Now, it is true that some things we didn't change, as Larry, I think, explained to you, and I think as some of you people are aware, one of the biggest concerns is, when I think there's some flexibility. The statute picks 2 miles, and one of the questions is that why 2 miles? And the answer is, well, because the state statute says 2 miles. Well, do you really need 2 miles? I think when we thought about it, it kind of came to the, sometimes, but maybe sometimes not. And so the idea behind being flexible between, and the difference between 1 mile, the city limits out to 1 mile, and then some changes where we're more flexible in the city limits out to 2 mile, was in recognition that, there's nothing magic necessarily about a 2 mile thing. Sometimes 2 miles, as Roy Smith pointed out, 2 miles is pretty far away, and extends out into 6 different townships. And so, do we really need to have our strictest controls within the area that runs from 1 to 2 miles out? And we thought, no, those are legitimate criticisms. And we attempted to address them. But when it gets close to our boundaries, as Larry mentioned to begin with, why do we do this at all? I mean, and as you guys know, we have issues about planning when you talk about the future. One of them are large lot sizes, make it very, very difficult, or maybe better put, very, very expensive to extend municipal services to those properties. So when you start picking a lot size that's 3 acres, within, a quarter mile of the city, it's like it's too big to economically extend municipal services to, but it's too small for further subdivision. And that's the bind that we get in that when you want to have those sort of mid-sized lots, you're really putting a ring around the city that makes it really uneconomical for landowners or developers, frankly, to extend roadways, municipal services. I mean, roads are, the bigger, the more footage you have between residences, the longer the road, the more expensive it is to build the road. Same thing's true with water mains and sewer pipes and all of those sort of municipal services. So where we didn't compromise, in as much as what the townships were requesting, was in the lot sizes within the area that would lie within 1 and 2 miles, within the city limits and 1 mile from the city limits. Now you might look at that and you might say, we should maybe we should be more flexible. But keep in mind that we do need to try to come up with planning so that maybe the landowners don't have to build the 33-foot, township road for 2 lots, but they need to provide the corridor for that. They need to provide the right-of-way for that, so that 20 or 30 years from now, there is a pathway for utilities and a pathway for roadways to service, additional properties. Those are the kind of planning things that we think are important, especially within the city limits, or I'll call it the 1 mile zone. So, if you look at the various lot sizes within the platting thing, the design standards, we tried to address some of their current concerns. For instance, lot sizes, minimum lot area width and depth shall not be less than that established by the Detroit Lakes Ordinance within the city or the county ordinance, which seems to make sense to us. I mean, since landowners have to comply with county zoning, they shouldn't be able to get lot sizes that don't comply with county zoning. And county zoning depends upon whether you're in the county shoreland district, where the lot sizes are smaller, or whether you're not within the shoreland district. So we just tried to make it clear in there that, lot sizes basically have to comply with whatever applicable zoning ordinance applies to the area, which is going to be county zoning within the 2 mile zone. So I don't know that I have other highlights. One of the things that we did in this, because there was some objection to the park dedication fees, there are changes in that section where we had proposed, and this was actually in the draft ordinance that got first reading back in 2019, where there was a expressed concern about the cost and the dollar figure on park dedication fees, especially within areas that were within 1 to 2 miles of the city. And so we tried to look at whether those fees could be reduced. And so we made proposals to reduce park dedication fees outside of that. And the debate there is that we all know that people who live within 1 mile or 2 miles of the city routinely, they generally work within the city. They do recreation within the city. They they're essentially part of this community, even if they're not technically in the city limits. And so, we don't think it's unfair that developments within the 2 mile zone should have to pay something for capital improvement of city parks, because the people in the townships use those city parks. But we did think that some flexibility depending upon the location of the development was appropriate, which would be a change over what, for instance, you just did tonight in one of those extraterritorial subdivisions. And it would, unfortunately, perhaps reduce the amount of park dedication fees that are collected. But, again, an attempt to accommodate that. So I guess with that would kind of open it up to any questions for Larry and I as far as, any of the specific changes. I don't want to go through it word by word. I've talked for enough. If any of you have any questions, I'm certainly available to answer them now. The other thing that I would suggest that you do, and really like that you do, is actually read this in detail. Go ahead and pen on some changes if you think that there are things that are wrong, or add questions or comments to it, because the idea is to use this as an opportunity to improve the city's subdivision ordinance first and foremost, in addition to trying to accommodate some concerns that have been expressed by the county and the townships.
I think what Charlie has recommended is that the planning commissioners should look at the changes, note down anything that they like or dislike about it, and we'll come back to this at a future meeting, probably as a public hearing, to talk about potential changes to the ordinance. And at that time, then you could bring up any suggestions you have, or if you want to, you could contact me with them earlier.
And, whether or not this should go directly to a public hearing, the normal process would be to put a draft out there for a public hearing in front of the planning commission. And, that could occur as early as next month if we wanted to do it. But I guess what I'd all like you to think about is to say, is this ready for prime time? Are we ready to actually have a public hearing on it? Or do we need to have more discussion about it? I've made a long speech here. It hasn't been a lot of discussion. So, maybe we want to have another discussion session before we actually have a public hearing. I leave that to your discretion.
Mr. Amstead or
Yes.
Larry. So we go to the 1 or 2 mile city limits, or past city limits, and there's a development past that yet, say 3 miles or 4 miles. And it probably is someplace, and I don't know where it's at, but if it's annexed, if that 1 mile or that 2 mile gets annexed into the city, what happens to that one that's 3, 4, 5 miles out?
The 2 mile extraterritorial area changes as the city boundaries change.
But I would understand that, but the thing is what if it's already developed?
Well,
Then we're stuck with it, would be the short answer.
The way it is, yes.
Yep.
Then
So,
it is what it is.
Yeah, one of the concerns that we've had is that, I've been around long enough now to, have seen the city grow in size a lot. And, what seemed to be way out in the country back in the 1970s, isn't way out in the country now. And, at least some parts of it are within the city, a lot of it.
You don't have to go back that far.
Exactly. Okay. And so the short, what we're trying, we can't do everything. I mean, the county's subdivision controls ordinance is there for for outside of the 2-mile zone. But it is true, when they allow subdivisions that, you know, at least from our perspective, are unwise, okay? Whether they're meets and bounds subdivisions or platted subdivisions. And then later on, those subdivisions either come into the city or come into the 2-mile zone. We don't get to change it, okay? They are what they are. And we end up, you know, potentially having to deal with the problems that those things create, which is why, especially within the city limits to 1 mile out, this really does make a difference. I mean, at the beginning of Larry's staff report, he just had a couple of examples of, you know, why does this matter to the city? Okay, why do we care? And you know, one of the issues is that we end up then having to deal with the problems that are created when a subdivision is at the time is thought of as being a rural subdivision. But 30 years later or whatever, it's not a rural subdivision anymore. And the problems that result from that change.
Okay, thank you.
So tonight, we were just trying to bring you all up to speed with what has been going on with our subdivision discussions with the county and the township. We wanted to put the proper perspective on it, more than just the newspaper account, I guess. And I think we've done that. And it will come back to us either for discussion or for a public hearing in the near future, I think.
Yep.
Just an editorial comment of, you know, we all know people, right? If you have any contacts with, influence with people in the townships, you know, we really would like to get them involved in this. And we've been met with a real kind of, at least from my perspective, a real stonewall. And, you know, why that is, I don't know. But it's unfortunate. And I think the tagline in the newspaper article is that this should not be a tug of war or a turf war. And I really believe that. So if you have any contacts or influence with any of the township officials or just basically landowners in the township, I mean, to me, you know, the real concern about the townships adopting their own subdivision ordinances, if I were a landowner within that 2-mile zone, is that, especially if I were someone who was thinking of developing my property, you know, just the bureaucracy of having to meet 2 different subdivision ordinances, I would be concerned.
Okay, Dan, that's all we have for tonight.
Yep, and thank you, Charlie. And in discussions I've been in, we actually have more in common with the townships than you think. I mean, one of their big concerns is roads, and that's one of the big things we look at with the subdivision when we look at subdivisions. So I think there's common ground there. And you know, the Planning Commission can sure help to provide a public forum so that this can be hashed out. So, okay, thank you again, Charlie and Larry. Anything else that needs to come before this group tonight?
I have nothing else, Dan.
Okay, well then, thank you very much. And I don't think there's anyone else that has any comment, so I will adjourn the meeting. So thank you very much. See you in a month.
Thank you. See you then.
Yep.
Thank you, Dan.
Yep. Thank you.